and with great respect, acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Yokuts Nation. Our campus, Stanislaus State, is built on the unceded ancestral lands of these indigenous tribes. Thank you for letting us honor them and give our thanks to their ancestors and descendants for their constant and careful stewardship of this land. The structure of this event is as follows. First, we will have a panel where our guest speakers will share their stories and work on the Day of the Dead or Día de Muertos. After the panel, 6 groups of students from my Education for Social Justice class will share their virtual art altars or altares on themes related to social justice. Then we will have a Q&A followed by a silent moment and closing remarks. Day of the Dead or Día de los Muertos is an indigenous Mexican holiday when people remember and honor their deceased loved ones. Unlike the spooky tone of Halloween, the Day of the Dead atmosphere is colorful and festive as the lives of those who have passed on are celebrated. The tradition of this holiday originated in Mesoamerica 3,000 years. 3,000 years. Indigenous people such as the Aztecs and Toltecs believed that death was another stage of life, and rather than grieve those who passed to the next world, their memories would be honored. Generally, observing the holiday from November 1st to November 2nd, people of Mexican ancestry have believed that the dead for a brief window leave the spirit realm and visit their loved ones in the mortal world. Consequently, those who celebrate Día de los Muertos visit the grave sites of their beloved, make altars, and leave offerings. Dr. Michelle Reyes reminds us that if you remember loved ones, they never cease to exist, and partaking in this ceremony is one way to normalize the cycle of life. As Día de los Muertos is celebrated globally, Dr. Matthew Sandoval maintains that we can think of the Day of the Dead or Día de los Muertos as like an indigenous beating heart under the skin of Catholicism, and that patterns of immigration cannot be separated from the holiday and its traditions. When the Chicanx community popularized this tradition in the United States during the 1970s, cultural and social politics became central to the celebrations. As Mexican Americans rearticulated their identities during the Chicana movement, leaders incorporated elements of their traditional culture, gathered as a community, and celebrated the aesthetics of this holiday with others. To honor departed spirits, folks utilized photos of deceased relatives, their favorite foods, flowers, the 4 elements, water, incense, or candles, papel picado, or pieces of colorful paper with intricate cutout designs and skulls. However, as the Day of the Dead has grown in popularity in the United States, this has brought forth cultural appropriation and commercialization concerns, especially with Disney films like Coco or Día de los Muertos Barbie. Thus, part of this day's event at Stan State is to generate dialogue while appreciating and understanding the heritage of Chicanx and Latinx peoples. The Day of the Dead must be understood as having pre-Columbian roots that are part of the 7,000-year-old Maiz-based culture, as highlighted by Don Roberto Cintley Rodriguez. However, as culture and traditions evolve, this holiday embodies intergenerational, cross-cultural, and inclusive attributes that make it more universal. Adhering to these traditions, this year's community event features virtual altars or altares that honor departed relatives while creatively bringing attention to social justice issues. As celebrating culture and recollecting beloved ones go hand in hand, we must remember that love is a foundational justice component that should always be incorporated into all our relations. Freire reminds us that if we do not love the world, if we do not love life, if we do not love people, I cannot enter into dialogue. Only dialogue, which requires critical thinking, is also capable of generating critical thinking. Without dialogue, there is no communication, and without communication, there can be no true education. Today, the Ethnic Studies Department at CSU Stans brings you a panel of professionals who make the Day of the Dead holiday an integral part of their life and work. These scholars, educators, and practitioners represent the disciplines of Chicanx, Latinx, ethnic, indigenous, and the LGBTQIA+ studies. Despite their multifaceted approaches to celebrating and addressing this holiday, their life and works produce more equitable outcomes for underrepresented populations. On a professional level, They remind us that we can create more diverse and inclusive spaces at universities and communities by sharing our stories and experiences. On a personal level, they teach us that adhering to the theme of tradition, remembrance, and love can generate new narratives where all people are viewed and treated as equal and complete human beings. Now, I want to invite the interim chair of the Ethnic Studies Department to talk about our community event. Dr. Ralph, please take the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Coparale, for that very illuminating and insightful introduction to this really sacred event. As Dr. Coparale shared, my name is Dr. Mary Rofe. I'm the interim chair of the newly formed Ethnic Studies Department. Bienvenidos a todos a este programa, and welcome to all of you here joined in beloved community. Even though this is the 8th annual Día de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead event here in Stan State, it is the first time that we are having this event as a fully fledged department at Stan State in Ethnic Studies' 50th year of existence at Stan State. And this is an homage to Day of the Dead. This is an homage to our ancestors. Their legacy and their life force lives on. And I would like to specifically and with great honor and great humility, welcome Kukunuchi to this space, who is the ancestor not only of these unceded Yokut lands, but also of Stan State and Stanislaus County, when he rallied other US-based Yokut Native Americans to fight against the Spanish colonizers, the conquistadores, and his name was translated from Kukunuchi to Stanislaus, and now has turned into some kind of Eastern European version. So the entire county and Stan State itself actually is a direct legacy stemming from our ancestor Kukunuchi. And I'm very excited to join you in this celebration and in this recognition that for thousands of years all over the globe, spanning not only from Mesoamerica, but also to Africa, throughout Asia, throughout the near, middle, and far east, and even throughout pre-Christian, pre-colonizing Europe, we as human beings for thousands of years have always honored and venerated our ancestors. And I'm very excited to take part in continuing this legacy of love.
Thank you, Dr. Ralph. Now I want to turn it over to Maria. If you can please open us up with a prayer.
Lios enseñavo que chamalea Nishpancinco neonotoca Maria Chane Vaiseboy Tosai Kavaikame Lopez Cosio Nococone Marisela Tutuli Gigi Sewailo Kaheme Wantetaviekti Inapoku Nachucho Nikalpolite Shikali Nioeme Tlamanalka. Just first, good evening to everybody. My name is Maria Molina Vaiseboy. I'm from Tucson, Arizona, what we know as Chukchon, the original homelands and territories of the O'odham peoples, the Yoeme people, and all of the other indigenous peoples who have migrated and have been caretakers and who have lived and sacrificed off of the land. Right now, I happen to be in Wilmington, North Carolina, so I want to acknowledge the Lumbee and Catawba lands that I'm situated on today. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity. Amishpancinco, Plazo Kamati, Heka Naucampa, Ilwicayolo, Intlayolo, Plazo Kamati, in Sempualilwi, Teotleco, in Toteocliwi, Tsilopochli, Plazo Kamati, give thanks for this beautiful evening where we get to find ourselves underneath these stars, underneath this beautiful sky. Give thanks to our Father, Son for this day. Give thanks to the clouds in the sky, to the oceans, to the waters, our breath of life. Give thanks for the food that we've been blessed to be able to consume today, that knowledge, that beauty, the relationship between the sun and the earth and the colors that are shared through our food and the way that we're able to ingest all the nutrients that we carry in our bodies that give us that life sustenance. Want to thank the life givers for allowing us to be able to continue in movement, to continue in reflection, to be able to propel our wills forward, the wills of our ancestors and all those who came before us. Acknowledging this time during this Teotleco that we're closer to what we understand as Mictlan, the place of darkness, the place of repose, being closer to that darkness, that absence of light, understanding that here we find ourselves closer to those who no longer carry light, who have passed on and who we carry in our hearts and in our memories in different ways. And give thanks for the opportunity to be able to sit with all of these relatives today, being able to share our hearts with one another, being able to speak the wisdom of our ancestors, especially with the experiences that we've survived as Indigenous peoples, and the way these words and these traditions and teachings are now translated through that experience that we've survived. Also want to acknowledge these Anima Miqua, the Mikael Witontli, this time of Muertos, and acknowledging also that our traditions and our ways of knowing, the way they've been transmitted from generation to generation, and because of all the different changes and atrocities that we've experienced and the ways that we have to survive and maintain our culture, acknowledging just the transformation and the evolution of our teachings, and knowing that, you know, they're not done the way our ancestors would do them, but that we still do them and engage in our culture and our traditions with good hearts. So we ask the life givers, the sustainer of life, these energías that govern the night, for health, for happiness, for love, feeling love in our hearts, creating this space of unconditional acceptance, of learning, of patience, of justice, of healing, and of truth. And asking that all of us can come together and be able to learn, share from one another. And when we break this circle, that we're all better people, that we're all more unified and engaged, and that we get to experience all these good and beautiful things. Tlazotamati.
Thank you, Maria. I really appreciate it. I feel more grounded now. Okay, so now we're going to move to the section of introducing our panelists. So first, Dr. Matthew Sandoval is a senior lecturer at Beretta Honors College at Arizona State University. He is also a faculty fellow at ASU's Social Transformation Lab. He holds a PhD in Culture and Performance from UCLA, an MA from NYU, and a BA from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He is currently writing a book titled A Transcultural Pop History of Day of the Dead, From Heritage to Hollywood and Back Again, which examines how Día de los Muertos has transformed in Mexico and the United States over the last century via pop culture, mass media, and commercialization. As a performer and storyteller, he also writes about the way of Day of the Dead intersects with his cultural experience as a working class mixed race Chicano. Jesus Chucho Ruiz, and I don't want, I'm probably gonna miss this of Chucho, forgive me, Chucho, right? Vai Seboy Odeve Opata Tlamatmalca is the son of Leonor and Juventino, partner of Maria Molina Vai Seboy, and father of 6 children. Over the past 20 years, Chucho has transformed the lives of countless youth using La Cultura Cura approach through grassroots organizing and youth engagement, and later as an employee of Chicanos por la Causa. In the last 7 years, Chucho has intentionally engaged men and boys through his work, implementing a call to men's life, respect, coaching, healthy manhood curriculum in several local high schools, and collaborating with local organization Emerge, Center Against Domestic Abuse, specifically with the Emerge's Men Education Program as a co-facilitator. Chucho founded the Chantlaca OG homies, original gente, talking circles and camps, gatherings for young men, male-identified youth of color to discuss healthy masculinity. Chucho is the lead facilitator of A Call to Warriors, a monthly virtual community conversation series for indigenous men, which I am also a part of, and it's an honor to share space with you again, Chucho. Growing up as a queer Chicana student in Los Angeles, Salma Valeria Torres, they, them, él, has a lifelong passion for social justice, education, and activism. Coupled with an insatiable intellectual curiosity, they seek knowledge of the world around them through any lens possible. Salma has a bachelor's degree in intensive history with an emphasis in Asian and Islamic studies from UC Santa Cruz, and a single subject teaching credential in social science from UC Merced. This has enabled them to bring culturally sensitive and trauma-informed teaching to the elementary and high school classrooms that they serve. Salma now works for the Central California LGBTQ+ Collaborative as the training and education community manager. They work with everyone from clinicians to foster parents in an effort to educate and advocate on behalf of queer issues in the Central Valley. Maria Molina introduces herself as Yoeme Tlamanalca. Her commitments include healing, parenting 6 children, and community healing through culture, ceremony, and justice. She belongs to the Talpoli Teoxicali, a constellation of families living the values, culture, and traditions of their ancestors as caretakers of the land, water, and sacred bundles. She is a clinical social worker working as a therapist and manager for the Hector Solo Path to Recovery. I am going to mess up this one, so sorry, Tiari Yuchia, and forgive me. A men's residential treatment home on the Pascuayaki Reservation. She also teaches as an adjunct faculty member at Pino Community College for the Social Services and Behavioral Health Department. Justice and healing are the foundation of her practice and way of life. So thank you for being with us today. And here are the questions that I will be asking you. So the first question is, how do you incorporate the Day of the Dead into your personal and or professional life? And question number 2 is, what can people learn about this year's Day of the Dead themes and traditions? What can people learn about this year's Day of the Dead themes of tradition, remembrance, and love? I'm going to post them in the chat, and feel free to address these questions as you see fit. So I wanted to start with Dr. Matthew Sandoval. If you can address any of these questions with us today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to get started. Thank you for the introduction. And I just want to begin by saying I'm honored to be a part of this panel. The backgrounds that I just heard on all of the fantastic work of my fellow panelists has got me really excited about hearing what everybody has to say. I'd also like to acknowledge just very briefly that I'm coming to you from Mexico City. So acknowledging the land of the Nahua people, before them Teotihuacan, Toltec. I mean, this is a very rich land of indigenous traditions. So that's where I'm tuning in from. So I just wanted to mention that. I would say, just to answer this first question, Dia de los Muertos is very special to me because it is the topic of my research. This is literally what I've devoted my professional life to studying in all of its various manifestations, both in how it's celebrated in the here and now, but also trying to research the deep history of this in terms of the Mesoamerican tradition, but also the deep tradition that came from Spain, because of course Dia de los Muertos is generally recognized as a syncretic holiday, meaning it's a mixture of at least a couple different cultural traditions. And that Spanish tradition, this is something that often gets left out of the conversation, that Spanish tradition that came over with colonization was also definitely influenced by North African culture. So the culture that came to Mesoamerica in the 1500s was also deeply enriched with African traditions, African cultures. And that's not always something that's generally recognized when we think about Dia de los Muertos also. So honoring and remembering the African history of this tradition is also deeply something that we need to keep in mind. I'll say that. What it means for me personally, I don't know anybody in this audience, but I'll be very candid that Dia de los Muertos has been medicine for me. I've had, like many people, I've lost people very close to me. I'm at the point now in my life where as I get older, I continue to lose more and more of my family and more people who I grew up with. Dia de los Muertos has been the thing that I've turned to that's allowed me to process these deaths, that have allowed me to heal from these deaths, that have allowed me a cultural tool to handle this grief. Because, growing up in the United States as part of American culture, we don't often get these tools available to us as like how to handle death, not just the actual burial process and the mortuary ritual that comes with it of burying the dead or cremation, etc. There's the long-lasting imprint that comes with losing somebody. The grief process is a very long process. And I imagine if you've grieved for somebody that you've deeply loved, then you know that it's a very long process. So the fact that as our culture, we have this cultural touchstone to turn to every single year to be able to continually heal and process that grief has been something really special for me. So that's the level at which it's very personal to me. But I'm sure I'm not alone in that regard. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. So now we want to ask the same questions to Salma. Again, how do you incorporate the Day of the Dead into your personal and or professional life? And what can people learn about this year's Day of the Dead themes of tradition, remembrance, and love?
Thank you, Juvenal, for such a warm welcome. Thank you, everyone, also for joining us today. So for myself, Dia de los Muertos, aside from using my own body as a walking art piece and incorporating my own hobbies with makeup to be able to start conversations, oftentimes I have people who see the looks and stop me on the street to tell me, wow, you look so good. And then I pause and I take the time to educate them on issues. This year's specific issue that I decided to focus on was the rate of which trans women are murdered in Mexico. Trans women, unfortunately, Mexico is the second most deadliest country for them in the world, just behind Brazil, where I believe 517 trans women were murdered in Mexico from the years of 2013 to 2017. So really, Dia de Muertos is another opportunity, I feel, for me to highlight a lot of LGBT issues that often get swept under the rug. But aside from that, my experiences personally with Dia de Muertos, aside from my professional life, involves a lot of religion and religious iconography, which is odd considering the track record between Catholicism and the LGBT community. My parents were always big on celebrating the holidays, siempre en familia, always with your family. Christmas, New Year's, Easter, all of those holidays were big for my parents. And they always had a lot of religious undertones, which was very hard growing up as a queer kid, and always very painful. The way that religion was so tightly intertwined with Latinidad was difficult for me and made these holidays very painful, and often felt like I wasn't Latino or I wasn't, being Latinx the right way because of my sexual orientation. But Dia de Muertos was one of those holidays that I remember always questioning why we didn't celebrate it the way the rest of my family did. I realize now that it's because of the internalized oppression or vergüenza, the societal concept of embarrassment in a lot of Latino cultures, particularly against our indigenous ancestry. From my father's side, Cuyutec, from my mother's side, Yaqui. And this kind of made the holiday, because of its aforementioned synchronicity of being both a mix of Catholic and indigenous traditions, it made it a little bit more touchy for my family. You know, I always remember being jealous of the ofrendas my family would make in Mexico. And I always wanted to make ofrendas like that, but my parents, in particular my mother, who was a little bit more held back by her internalized oppression for her Yaqui heritage, who wouldn't want to celebrate this. You know, the extent of our celebrations was buying pan de muerto and champurrado. And, you know, sometimes my parents would talk about nuestros difuntos, our deceased ones, but that was about it. And it really wasn't until I started college and started to freely express my sexuality and find a space within the Latin LGBTQ plus community for myself that Dia de Muertos started to take on a whole new meaning for me. And it's still how I celebrate it to this day. In Mexico, La Santísima Muerte, or Saint Death, is the patron saint for healing, protection, and safe delivery to the afterlife for her devotees. And more broadly, she protects all social outcasts, but more specifically, the LGBTQ plus community falls within her realm of protection and is actually singled out as being the community that she is a particular patron saint for. And I think for me, that symbolizes a lot because it's how I experience my Latinidad. And it's that connection of being able to connect my queerness with my Latinidad, and that they're not mutually exclusive components, that I can be both queer and Latina, you know? You know, in college, when I began to build my found family, which is a family you choose and often becomes the main nuclear family for a lot of familially rejected LGBTQ plus individuals, what we would do is we would build our ofrenda together, and we would build it in honor of La Santísima Muerte as our centerpiece, who was our patron saint. And we'd ask for protection and health for ourselves and our loved ones, both dead and alive. And she was the saint that, you know, we could just worship in the same way that our parents would worship San Judas Tadeo or La Virgen Maria. And after our altars were built, what we would do is, you know, just like anyone else, we'd cook together, we'd break bread together, eat together, which is such a huge part of this holiday, not only remembering your past loved ones, but also the loved ones that you still have around you, I feel, and celebrating with them and remembering your loved ones. And what would come out of this was just this beautiful patchwork of stories, of photos, you know, of stories from these Latina LGBTQ plus individuals. We'd put our photos of our loved ones up on the ofrendas and make their favorite foods. And, you know, we'd use the specific recipe that was passed down from family to family. And all in all, I guess I could just say that it was a very soul-bearing experience that came with a lot of emotion, as Dr. Matthew Sandoval said, in being able to heal for a lot of us, and the healing that we needed the most to be both okay with our Latinidad identity and our queer identity, in the comfort of the people who would respect and understand us as we were. So I'll leave it at there.
Thank you, Salma. I really appreciate it. Next, I want to open it up for Maria. Again, the questions are, how do you incorporate the Day of the Dead into your personal and or professional life? And what can people learn about this year's Day of the Dead themes of tradition, remembrance, and love?
Thank you. And these are super loaded questions to try to answer in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try it first. Salma, you look beautiful. That looks so amazing. So I think for me, to incorporate Day of Dead into your personal and or professional life, I think the way that we as Indigenous people see the way our culture manifests itself, you know, and we see it across Indigenous cultures. We have different, what they call deities for different manifestations of nature and of creation. And so we anthropomorphize, you know, natural phenomena and different things. And for muertos, I kind of see that as being similar to that. You know, I carry ceremonial fire, and in that ceremonial fire, we have to do a specific ceremony during the time of Mikail Huitontli, and we call on somebody's anima. So basically, it's a way for us to be able to have intimacy and connection with what is Teo, what is energy, what is light, what is life, what is vibration. And we're able to use some of the cultural teachings that we have and be able to place intimate relationships that we have to that fire, that ceremonial fire. It allows us to have more intimacy and more obligation to the mandates that come with those instruments that we use and as being a caretaker of that element. And so, you know, like the way that we try to teach our children, you know, that we've always existed together, you know, as what we call the cosmic fire, what is light, what is energy. And so we've always been together, you know, we're all piece of a greater whole, and we're on borrowed time here on this earth, the way that they say, but we're always going to exist in infinitely as that Deo, as that energia, and as that life. And so kind of spilling that into professional and professional life. It's hard to talk about personal life because it's more of a collective experience that I have as an Indigenous woman with my community, with my ancestors, and with the responsibility that I have right now as, you know, I'm living and walking this earth right now. So right now it's our turn to be caretakers of the earth and to be sure that we live the obligations of our ancestors that we're very connected with because of these kinds of ceremonies and understandings. And being able to engage in that really helps us to carve out for ourselves our identity and what our values are and what matters right now for us as Indigenous peoples and the ways that we walk this earth. And so for me, you know, that in professional life, how that spills in is that the way that I understand and the way that those animas and that fire teaches me and the voice and stories of my ancestors is that I have to be true to that lineage. I have to be true to that initial thought about how do we maintain our humanity? How do we make sure that we understand that we live within, amongst, and as part of? How do we stay humble? How do we center love, justice, and truth? And it's by staying connected and making sure that we, you know, contribute to that momentum of the image and the visions that our ancestors had for us to have justice, life, happiness, love, and to be able to live to the fullest potential that we can, you know, as life being here as part of creation. And so for professional life, I never like the word professional. And so what that tells me as somebody who's in a leadership position in that whole mechanism of behavioral health, which I always would say I would never work in the field of behavioral health, but that's where I ended up and get to do the work that I do. But it's important for me to always be in resistance of the way they try to professionalize us and how that contradicts our values and Indigenous people. So for me, it's really important in my role to be able to break down, you know, that false armor of professionalism and be able to connect with my team members and the people that we serve from a place of humility, love, truth, justice, and the values that my ancestors have instilled in me. And so, and in the work that I do, it's always really important to be able to say, we're here by the grace of our ancestors. You know, it's a different language and it's a different narrative, understanding that they fought for us, they died for us, they had to lay down arms for us, and they had to swallow a lot of things that didn't quite feel right. But you know what? I still feel it in the pit of my stomach, what they swallowed that didn't feel right. And so I'm going to make sure that I keep talking about that and reminding people what our role and responsibility is, and as Indigenous people, to be just pure love and acceptance for each other at all times. And so for the themes of tradition, remembrance, and love, I think something that has been becoming more and more apparent to me every time that we have that ceremony, you know, because our, you know, animas or our ancestors, we call on them throughout the year in different ceremonies. It's not just, you know, one day of the year, because it's again, it's like a tool for us to be able to stay connected, have intimacy, and have a duty. You know, I have a duty because of that connection that I have to my ancestors. So in ceremony, we can see how, you know, thinking about tradition, our traditions have changed. You know, we see all the different colors that exist now in these ceremonies and the teachings because of our experiences and the ways that we've survived and all the beauty that different people have contributed to that ceremony. So we can see the tradition, we can see the remembrance, right? Like we light candles, we say names, we sing songs, and we can see the love, but we also have to remember that we're now we're still in a battle. It's still resistance. Ceremony now isn't just about ceremony. It's about resistance. And every time we get together and as Indigenous people and engage in ceremony, that's us with our fists up. And that's us saying that we're still here. We're still fighting to maintain these traditions. And we also have to remember that remembrance is different for us now than it was for our ancestors, because for us, remembrance is a collective trauma. It was an attempted genocide, and it's the ongoing socio-political nightmares that we see that continue to oppress us and that they're still trying to kill us off. They're not done in reality, right? So to me, our ceremony is our resistance. And you know, there's a candle that we light at one point in the ceremony, and people know it as the anima sola. We call it the Isiel Yolotli. And for us, that's transformed. And that's transformed to include that resistance and that justice. It's the fire of justice for all the atrocities that have been committed and continue to be committed against us, and the ways that we thrive and survive, and the resiliency that we have, and the fact that we're still committed to fighting and holding on to our culture and going back and reflecting on our traditional values so that we can be who we were meant to be. Because we were meant to be a certain way, the way that our ancestors dreamed us to be, and the different teachings that they left for us was a gift. You know, I always think about, like, what were they doing? Like, were they sitting around a fire? Like, how did they think of all these amazing cultural teachings and science? Like, and they just sat there and they thought about, like, what's the most beautiful thing that we can leave for them? Like, let's put our heads together. What's the most beautiful thing that we can leave for them? And when we see what those things are, it's like, dang, they were good. They were good. And so these teachings, what they tell me is that I'm going to be okay. My people are going to be okay. My children are going to be okay. And that we're going to keep going with that mandate that they left us, to be good caretakers of this earth and one another, and to continue to pass on these teachings to the next generations. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Maria. Again, so now we're going to pass it on to Chucho. And again, Chucho, the questions are, how do you incorporate the Day of the Dead into your personal and or professional life? And what can people learn about this year's Day of the Dead themes of tradition, remembrance, and love?
Thank you, and I apologize. I always try to be prepared with that mute button, and it never works, man. I always fail at it. So, I want to just start off by saying, Kolitayoa, Mishpancinco, Nuanyolke, no Nancy Leonor, no Tatsin Ventino, ne want to toka Chucho, ni Chanen by Seboy, Iwanostin Cocone, Marisela, Tutuli, Gigi, Sewalo, Kaheme, Wanteta Viecti, no Tesiwa, Maria, ni Calpolite, Oshikali, ni Utebe, Yuametla Manalca, in Tlaxcoma, Chilia. Just wanted to say thank you, Juvenal, and thank you, Vivian and Mary, everyone, for just the invitation and the space, and of course to Dr. Matthew Sandoval and Salma Torres and Maria for just all your passion that I'm hearing tonight, your brilliance, your lived experiences, and how you've held this and you carry this and with so much pride, right? And so I really appreciate that, and it makes me feel a lot of love and hope in my heart to be able to just another way to know that that we could be seen and that we could be represented as a people, and because too often we're not, and too often we're misrepresented, especially during these times of muertos, right, where it's so close to Halloween, and so much of our culture is being used as a costume, right, in different ways. And so I really was appreciating what Salma was saying in terms of education, right, like educating and the opportunity to do that, and then also like how exhausting that could be too. But it's like with what Maria is saying, it's like we're ready to go. Like the fall comes and we have all these things that are coming up as Native peoples, and it's at the same time like it's this huge battle, right, that we have to engage in. And so just knowing that, right, like how, you know, we're going to engage in these cultural practices, and at the same time, you know, as we're trying to continue to seek healing through these cultural practices, we're like experiencing trauma all over again, right? And I feel like when it comes to muertos and a lot of the, you know, my community, I want to acknowledge our community here. There's a lot of Calpoleque that are on here. Thank you, Juanan. I know I reached out to you and I was like, hey man, can I share this link to the peeps, man? Because I really want them to come. And a lot of who I am, my community, you know, we are each other. You know, it's not so much about identity, it's about kinship for us. And so it's so important for us to be here collectively, and to know that we engaged in this ceremony here recently, and it's a lot of trabajo, and we feel it's a lot of responsibility to fulfill that, you know. And but I feel a lot of privilege. You know, I came, you know, I didn't grow up with muertos. I didn't wasn't exposed to these practices until I was at the age of 17, and I'm not much older now, so it hasn't been that long. I'm kidding, I'm a lot older now. So I'm 42, I'm gonna be 43 soon, right? So I've been practicing these traditions for some time now, and very closely, you know, we came by way of Danza Azteca, Chichimeca, and now it's a Calpoli, and it's something that, you know, we've held down every single year. And for us, it's during this time of Teotleco, which we acknowledge isn't necessarily the original times, right? The original times were in sometime in mid-August from our teachings, right? To like late September was a cuarentena that later became, you know, these last few days of October into November. In our community, we start on the 28th and we go to the 2nd. We do the velación on the 1st. And this year was a little bit different, right? And so when I think about incorporating into my life, I feel for me it's not really an incorporation, because it's like the foundation. This is just another foundational piece to who we are, right? In the ways that we walk on this earth. And with work, I've had a lot of privilege to be able to hold on to my integrity, cultural integrity, everywhere I go. And I just transitioned to a new Hale, and I was scared, man. I was scared because of all the reasons, you know, we get scared because of capitalism and, you know, what's going to happen. And I don't want to request this day off and that day off. And I was over here. We're over here, as Maria mentioned, we're over here on Lumpy Catawba land, Wilmington, North Carolina. And there was another homie that was over here that's on Danzante, and he's like, "No, man, we got to do something over here. It doesn't matter, you know." And I was like, "Okay." So we let everybody know, and we were able to circle up, you know, yesterday on the beach and offer, you know, some songs, offer some flowers. And so I just have felt so fortunate to be able to be in the spaces with the people that I am, because I know that not everybody has it that way. You know, not everybody's fortunate to have that. And for me, you know, those, like Maria mentioned, the traditions are constantly changing, right? And how is it that we could acknowledge the transformation of tradition, right? And hold integrity. And then the remembrance, to me, has to do with us working really hard to tap into a genetic memory. And sometimes that comes through the way of the language. I think a lot of it survives in the language. And I think for me, it feels like so often the way that we think or we hear about death today is very it's rooted in European, Western, Christian concepts, right? We learn about heaven and hell. We learn about, all these, eternity and we'll meet again and those types of things. And for us, I think it's about reaching back to those ancestral teachings, that ancestral knowledge and wisdom of how we perceive an understanding of constant transformation and how everything's been something before it was now, and it's constantly becoming. And I just really appreciated that what Sama was saying about, again, the opportunity of education, because this is a time for us to acknowledge in all the ways that we continue to experience trauma, violence, and in many forms genocide, right? We talk about femicide, we talk about the violence that's happening in queer communities and two-spirit communities, and with femicide and all those things. Invoking, like when I'm thinking about remembrance, I'm invoking what were ways that our ancestors got down when it came to like honoring all those multiple identities, right? And like celebrating that. And it's not to like romanticize that, but we know that there's teachings there that could be forgotten, but also like just not talked about intentionally, right? So how is it that we could like have those conversations and bring those conversations to the forefront? And even within our traditions, how do we stretch our traditions from not being so rigid in our practices? And because with a lot of that historical and intergenerational trauma, there's still a lot of historical and intergenerational wisdom and medicine and healing. And so I feel really, really fortunate. I feel really fortunate, and I feel really humbled to be able to share about this, because it was different for us this year, and yet we felt a sense of fulfillment, right? To cumplir in the ways that we needed to in our community, and then to further this conversation, right? And and I'm just humbled. I know that our compadre is on here, simply, and I just want to acknowledge him because I know that he shows up with a lot of love, so just that last piece, how we show up for one another with so much love, right? And I think ultimately that's what's bringing us together here, is like what our ancestors envisioned for us. Like, we're honoring them tonight. We really are, we're really honoring everything that they cared about, everything that they dreamed about, everything that they sacrificed and suffered for. We do that, this evening, and hopes that we continue to do that, and that creation resistance that our compadre simply talks about. So I just wanted to say that much, man. Thank you again, each and every one of you.
Thank you. And we would like to take it back to Dr. Sandoval. If you could touch on the themes again.
Sure. Yeah, I want to thank you very much. I was going to touch on two of the themes, which are tradition and remembrance specifically. I wanted to speak about those very quickly. I would say one thing when I hear the word tradition is I would say I immediately would want to complicate that by saying traditions, plural, to recognize the plurality of Día de Muertos, because in some very real sense, this isn't a singular cultural phenomenon, that there only exists diversity among Día de Muertos, that there is no singular Day of the Dead, there are only a rich diversity, which is to say that the way that it's celebrated in Northern California is different than the way it's celebrated in Southern California, is different than it's celebrated in San Antonio, is different than the way it's celebrated in Tucson, Mexico City, Oaxaca, everywhere else. In other words, that there is no singular tradition. And so to me, when I hear things like Dia de los Muertos as a cultural tradition, I always feel like that's something being imposed on this thing, as opposed to recognizing that it exists always in a plurality. And that to me is not a bad thing. That is one of the things that makes this most beautiful. I love the fact that I get to travel around as much as I do to Mexico and Southwest and elsewhere to see the rich diversity by which this is celebrated, that to me, every community that I've ever been a part of or have studied has studied it and celebrated it in widely different ways, that many of the traditions that I would call traditions don't exist elsewhere. The ofrendas that are made in Quintana Roo or the Yucatan are completely different than the ofrendas that are made in Mexico City. Because of the geographic location, the ofrendas are often hung in the trees because, of course, their geography is jungle. You know what I mean? So like incorporating different aspects of the agriculture or different aspects of the geography become so paramount to this. So to me, when I hear tradition, I'm always thinking traditions, plural. And then I think when I think of tradition, I also kind of wanted to address a couple of things that I saw in the chat, and then just something that Chucho acknowledged, which is that one of the things that I kind of let myself off the hook for, because I did have a lot of shame around this, which is that this cultural tradition was not passed on to me. Part of that has to do with, as Salma talked about, the kind of internalized hate that existed among our ancestors as part of, or at least my ancestors, I'll speak of my ancestors, as part of the assimilation project of moving from being Mexican to being quote unquote American, meant, of course, leaving a lot of cultural aspects behind or hiding those cultural aspects away. And so for many of us, and I would say when I say us, I mean primarily Chicanos who are like in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, etc. Dia de Muertos was not part of a tradition that was handed down to us. It was something that we encountered later in our life through things like danzante or things like mecha or things like Chicano cultural organizations in our communities more generally, which kind of said, hey, this is something that we should revive, that would be useful for us to revive and rekindle as a tradition. So as opposed to thinking of Dia de los Muertos as something that gets handed down tradition to, or generation to generation to generation, that there have been breaks in that handing down, or that there have been side routes into that. And somehow, and for a lot of us who are older, this is how we encountered Dia de Muertos, which is funny because like for many of my students now, they have a Dia de Muertos tradition because their grandparents created that tradition and then passed it down because their grandparents were part of the 60s and 70s Chicano movement, in which these traditions were revived in a very big way. So for many people, I would say, and this is according to people who I've interviewed as part of my ethnography, they acquire Dia de Muertos as a cultural practice later in life. So it becomes a tradition because they've created it as a tradition. And that, again, is not a bad thing too, because traditions are always mixing. Traditions never stay the same. I think that that's kind of a through line that I'm hearing among many people, that we are always an artistic people, meaning creativity is always part of the process too. And in order to make sure that a tradition remains a tradition, you have to make it culturally viable, which means that you have to make it available for people in a language and in a way that's going to ensure its continuation. That's also part of tradition. I would also say that I'm kind of fascinated about this recent, I would say a recent phenomenon that I've noticed, which is that Dia de Muertos is becoming more and more identified as a cultural tradition as opposed to a religious ritual. And part of that has to do with businesses, universities, organizations more generally pushing their diversity, equity, and inclusion. I cannot speak for some reason. But as part of that, making it like a cultural celebration so that it's honored as a cultural tradition, and then kind of siphoned of its religious meaning, siphoned of its ritual components, so that it becomes nothing more than like a colorful fiesta, as opposed to having any real efficacy. because Dia de Muertos, and I think that this would stand true for anybody who has been practicing this for a while, it is a ritual. It does come as a religious component. It does always have that, even if it's not always recognized. So as Dia de Muertos becomes part of a cultural phenomenon in the United States, and even in Mexico more generally growing in popularity, that it's growing as a cultural tradition and not necessarily as a religious holy day. And to me, that hurts a little bit, because I know that the ritual component is the central heart of this thing. The festival component is a component as well, but the beating heart of Dia de Muertos is and always has been ritual. And so my fear is that as Dia de Muertos becomes a cultural tradition, quote unquote, that it also somehow loses part of its religious efficacy or its identity as a ritual. And then another thing that I would just say very kind of briefly about tradition is that one of the things I've been quite fascinated by in the last couple of years by doing ethnographic research down here in Mexico is that the tradition of Dia de Muertos is becoming ever more mixed with Halloween tradition. So although in the United States, especially among Chicanos, we like to separate Halloween from Dia de Muertos so that these are always recognized as like very different holidays. In Mexico, they're becoming one and the same in a very real way. So like, por ejemplo, I was in the cemetery yesterday for ceremonies, and there were young children and adults dressed in superhero costumes, dressed as Marvel characters, dressed as clowns, dressed in masks in the cemetery. That this wasn't something that was just reserved for October 31st, that this is now becoming a newer tradition, a new component. So I imagine in 10 years, if you were to visit Mexico City cemeteries on Dia de Muertos, you would find ever more instances of Halloween being incorporated into it. And I think that is, I don't want to put value judgment on a right or wrong way or bad. It's just like acknowledging the amazing amount of like cultural mixing that happens anywhere that Dia de Muertos is celebrated. And then finally, I just kind of want to say with regards to remembrance, because I know that that's a theme here. And, you know, my sentiments regarding remembrance in this holiday, I really would echo everything else that my fellow panelists have mentioned. But I would also say for me, and this is something that I've been trying to stress to my students for the last several years and thinking about the holiday as a form of remembrance, that it also has to be, I think, a way of checking in with oneself regarding how you want to be remembered, because we will all, God willing, end up on an ofrenda someday. Our lineage will be honoring us because we will pass. So we have to be thinking about how do we act in the here and now? How do we behave? How do we use this life? In that regards, I would say that sense of remembrance is very much tied to love. And I think of love here in the way Dr. Cornel West thinks about love, that justice and love are the same things, that justice is what love looks like in public. That sense of like remembrance, how do we want to be remembered? How do you use this life in a way that actually makes a better society, makes a better world, makes a better impact, makes a real impact? That to me is what Dia de Muertos is about as well, that it's not just about remembering the ancestors, that it also has to be about how can I make sure that I'm going to live a life that's worthy of remembrance, and worthy of remembrance in a good way. And then I think I would just leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Sandoval, and thank you for the panelists. And I want to remind you that we will have a Q&A. So if you have any questions or if you want to formulate some questions, please do so. But we're going to wait for that after our virtual altar. So now we are moving to the next part of the program. And again, 6 groups of students from my course, Education for Social Justice, will share their virtual altar. So we're going to go with altar number 1. If you can please share your altar with us.
Can you guys see it? Yeah, okay. So hi, my name's Lisette.
And my name is Liliana.
And we created a altar that represents the deadly natural disaster that occurred this year, Hurricane Ian. Hurricane Ian was a devastating natural disaster that hit many countries such as Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the United States. This natural disaster took the lives of 101 people. This includes 92 in Florida, 5 in North Carolina, 1 in Virginia, and 3 in Cuba. Hurricane Ian caused thousands of families to lose their homes, family members, and destroyed cities. Our prayers go out to those that were affected by this natural disaster, and we hope that peace and normality can slowly go back to those lives that were altered by Hurricane Ian.
We chose this topic because it really hit us hard and people lost so much and they were hit really hard by Hurricane Ian, and many lost their lives, their loved ones, and most, if not all, of their belongings. And there are many things that you and I can do to help bring relief to those who are hit by Hurricane Ian. And something that you would be able to do would be to donate to one of their many GoFundMes, remembering that absolutely anything helps. I will be including a link to a GoFundMe in the chat. They are halfway to their goal of $100,000. And always, like I said, remember, anything helps, and thank you in advance.
Thank you. So next we want to move with altar number 2. So group number 2, if you can please share your altar with us.
All right, so my name is Alyssa Sekurik.
Hello, my name is Anna Vivi.
Hello, my name is Paula Reyes.
And our other group member is Alejandra. I'm not sure if she's here tonight. So for our altar, we did we are focusing on the violence against women, and so it's dedicated to women who went through violence silently, and these were to women who weren't like women at all, but like young girls. And this is dedicated to like women who can no longer take it and who lost hope, and also who felt trapped, and even the women who have lost their lives due to the violence against them, and that were also like never saved.
So this altar was basically dedicated for like awareness, to be aware of the signs, to be aware of the silent pain that people go through once violence is happening against them. Mostly against women. We're not saying it doesn't happen against men, but mostly women do suffer violence against them, and a lot of them, they do it silently. They do it when they're teens, when they're young girls. They don't know how to stop it, how to free themselves from it. And I just feel like it's a topic that's not really talked about in education. So we wanted to bring awareness of it and just, yeah, explain what goes on in the silence of women and violence. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move with altar number 3. If you can please share your altar with us. Group number 3.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you guys see my screen too?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so our altar, my name is Morgan Bricky. Our altar. All right. Our altar is dedicated to the various religious groups throughout the United States that have been oppressed and attacked for their beliefs. This has been and continues to be a common occurrence throughout our country's history. Even our First Amendment right, the right to freedom of religion, minority religious groups are continuously targeted for their religious beliefs. Hold on, sorry. Ariel, could you continue?
Yeah, 1 second. My mic isn't the best, so I hope you can hear me. The altar that our group is presenting today is representative of the various religious groups that have been and are still being oppressed throughout the United States. Our altar does not contain all of them, of course, as there are a vast majority of religions in the US. So the altar that we're presenting to you is our main goal to focus on incorporating the major religions that have been oppressed throughout the United States. The Christian religions that we have included on our ofrenda are Islam, Buddhism, Shinto, Judaism, Hinduism, Taoism, Sikhism, and Native spirituality.
While creating the altar, our goal was to pay homage to Hispanic culture and to make the altar as authentic as we possibly could. We attempted to create a virtual yet realistic ofrenda, hopefully one that would resemble something that you would find in somebody's home. Included with the ofrenda are the 4 life elements: water, wind, earth, and fire, represented by the pan de muerto for earth, the water vase for water, the papel picado to represent the wind, and the candles, which represent fire. There's also salt, incense, marigolds, and monarch butterflies placed throughout the altar to represent the souls of the ones we've lost to religious oppression. And hanging on the virtual walls are pictures of the symbols that represent each of the oppressed religious groups.
To the left of the altar, there's a picture of a small percentage of the Native American children who were forced into assimilating into American culture, as well as their religion by being placed in American Indian boarding schools. The photo on the right shows the memorials for the victims that were placed at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where 11 Jewish members were shot and killed for their beliefs and their race by anti-Semitism back in 2019.
Thank you. Okay, so now we want to go with group number 4. If you can please share your altar with us.
Good afternoon. My name is Tisha.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Celeste.
I'm Alexis.
And we would like to start off with a quote. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Harriet Tubman. We are here today to honor the women who inspired and paved the way for future generations and who gave their lives to advocating for social justice and women's rights. Women's contribution to history are neglected in history books, and today we would like to honor all who have come before us and highlight a few. I'd like to start with Jordan.
Yes, I just want to say thank you everybody for joining us. And I'd like to start with Mary Church Terrell. Mary Eliza Church Terrell was born in 1863, and she made massive strides for social justice and equity for roughly 80 years until her timely death in 1954. Her life work was predicated on the belief that African Americans would help end racial discrimination by advancing themselves and other members of their race through education, work, and community activism. Her motto, that was later to be adopted by other major movements, was "Lifting as we climb." I've prepared only a fraction of her major achievements to share with all of you guys today. One of which is she was part of the first Black woman to graduate with both bachelor's and master's degrees from Oberlin College. Some years later, she began her career as a scholarly activist while teaching at a segregated grade school in Washington, D.C. During this time, she co-founded the National Association of Colored Women, as well as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP for short. She also played a pivotal role in gaining the right to vote for women of color. She published an autobiography titled "A Colored Woman in a White World," outlining her experiences with discrimination. And even at age 86, she fought and won against the Supreme Court to dismantle segregation in public spaces and restaurants of DC. I believe she is the epitome of Black female excellence and dedicated her life to uplifting us all. So for that, we honor her name and legacy with this altar. And next.
Next, we're doing Agatha Teagle Hansen, born 1873, died 1959. She was born deaf, was a trailblazer, educator, writer, and poet. She was a valedictorian of class of 1893 and was the first woman to graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree from Gallaudet University, which was the first deaf college. To overcome the challenges women face in an overwhelming male environment in education, Ms. Teagle Hansen, who was named president, and 12 women students established a literary society named OWLS, OWLS, in 1892. The purpose of the society allowed them to discuss literature and debate with each other, as they were not permitted to debate with male students. The meaning of the OWLS abbreviation is secret, only known by the members of the society, yet over time it became a national alumni organization, and in 1954, the society changed their name to Phi Kappa Zeta. She was not only an influential leader in the deaf community, she spent her life advocating for all women to have the right to education. She believed, and I quote, "Women should be free as the air to learn what she will be and to devote her life to whatever vocation seems good to her." In 2014, Agatha Teagle Hansen was honored by the National Women's History Project as one of the women of character, courage, and commitment. Next is Celeste.
Okay, so I did mine on Mahsa Amini. She is a 22-year-old Iranian woman who died in the hospital under suspicious circumstances. The guidance patrol arrested her for not wearing her hijab properly, and people witnessed that she was beaten to death. Ever since her death, she has sparked thousands of protests in Iran and all over the world. There have been TikToks and videos made of women taking off their hijabs and even cutting their hair, which is going against the government rules. She is the change that Iran needs, and she is igniting reform for American Muslim women today.
Was that all, Celeste?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm like, I don't want to interrupt you. Okay, so the next person that we have is someone that I feel very honored to get to honor today. And it's Frida Kahlo. So her full name is Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón. She was a Mexican artist born July 6th, 1907. She was born and raised during the Mexican Revolution. So she saw herself as like the daughter of the Mexican Revolution. And not only was she seen as that, but she was also a major symbol for women. She had a strong character and she really fought for independence. And she has now become even an emblem for the feminist movement, as well as like the LGBTQ community and their movements. She promoted a lot of women's inner strength because she went through a lot in her lifetime, starting from illnesses that ranged from birth, and then later on she struggled recovering from a trolley accident. She also struggled with fertility. So she brought a light to a lot of these struggles that had to do with feminist movements or class. And she was really committed to the emancipation and equality of women. So this is a woman that I have a lot of respect for because she brought a lot of hope for the Mexican community and Mexican women.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move with altar number 5. Thank you very much. So group number 5, if you can please share your altar with us.
Good evening, everyone. For our altar, we focused on age oppression and the issues that coexist within it, such as child trafficking, unaccompanied minors at the U.S. border, at the U.S. and Mexico border, border patrol detention centers, school to prison pipeline, and criminalization of youth, people of color. We chose these images to illustrate the impact that society, school, and government systems have on our children and youth, and how they all contributed to the death of their innocence and their hope for a better future. We also included pictures of victims who have sadly passed away. So good evening, everyone. My name is Alexis Panelist, and In our altar, we included the picture of a young African-American teenager that was a victim of child trafficking. Her death and her story reflect countless children who have been disregarded by society and fallen a victim to sex or labor trafficking. Sadly, young girls have a higher chance to be trafficked, but regardless of one's gender and age, they will be targeted. Many survivors have stated that sex trafficking killed their innocence. Children make up 1/3 of child trafficking worldwide and are targeted mainly for their vulnerability and their impressionability, leading them to become victims of what is known as modern-day slavery. Many children from Latin American countries come to the U.S. unaccompanied, searching for a better future. The violence that exists in these countries, such as gangs or cartels, is a primary motivation for fleeing. Others enter involuntarily as labor or sex trafficking victims. There is a harsh, brutal reality to the Border Patrol detention centers. Young immigrant children are being mistreated, abused, and mysteriously disappearing. We need answers to stop the death of their innocents. These innocent young children are fleeing from the injustices in their countries for better opportunities. They are being denied their requests for basic needs such as food, water, or information about what will happen to them. We have seen the U.S. government unashamedly use unaccompanied children as bait to arrest and detain their loved ones, secure more funding for immigration enforcement, and racially profile teens in order to significantly reduce their shot at due process and immigration court. They have no right to court-appointed counsel, and regardless of age or legal representation, it is their responsibility to submit paperwork.
The privatization of our prison system has also converted it into modern-day slavery by forcing inmates and parolees to do labor and limiting their chances for a better future. With our current educational system, we are feeding our children into the prison system. Schools have been slowly resegregating, and schools that are primarily attended by African Americans and Latinos are underfunded. This leads to low-quality education and low student participation. In fact, the implementation of high-stakes standardized testing limits students who do poorly from continuing to pursue higher education. Studies have also shown that schools that have strict school discipline have shown to have a link with adults who get incarcerated. These and countless other factors are contributing to the school to prison pipeline. Continuing with this theme, we also address the criminalization of BIPOC youth. This is related to this issue because it begins from a young age. BIPOC, even as children, have to confront and deal with stereotypes about themselves and their communities their entire lives. Indeed, as they are growing up, they are not given as much of a benefit of the doubt as their white counterparts. For example, in areas where there is a lot of gang activity, police may erroneously assume that when a group of young people of color are in a gang, when they are just hanging out with their friends. In poorer communities, there is an assumption that youth are criminal and inherently out of control or destructive, and they ignore factors like poverty, lack of resources in their community, and their schools, blaming them or their families instead. In this way, youth of color are not allowed to be individuals, seen instead as part of a collective in a way white youth are not, yet at the same time are made to individually be at fault for their own oppression. Our youth do not get to have a rebellious phase or be seen as the youngsters that they are, always instead a threat, a danger. They deserve to have the same innocence and childhood as other children. We created this altar because children are our future, and we as a community, as a society, we're failing them, and especially our youth of color, they're not getting to have their full childhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Group number 6.
All right, good evening, everyone. Our altar is entitled Sueña con los angelitos, o en inglés para nuestros amigos que no son hispanohablantes, Dream with Little Angels. And tonight we're going to be honoring the children who've been lost to the violence of school shootings. We're honored to have the opportunity to create and present this altar to you today. My name is Anthony, and to help explore this topic and honor those lost, I'm joined here today by my wonderful colleagues.
Paola Martinez.
Arlanis Rodriguez.
And Deja Porter.
In this tier of our altar, we represent some of the school mascots and logos of some school shootings. For example, we included Santa Fe High School in Texas, Virginia Tech University, Robb Elementary School in Texas, Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, and lastly, Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. In this tier, we included candles and marigold flowers. We also have baby breath flowers and orchid flowers, and these are specifically for children's grapes. Lastly, we have skull and a alebrije, which is a sort of mythical creature and spirit animal meant to look after our loved ones and guide children through their afterlife. Like a guardian angel, alebrijes are spirit guides and protectors. All these items represent thoughtfulness, love, honor, light that lives inside a child, and light to welcome back the spirits to their altars.
In this tier, we place some of the foods and drinks that children enjoy. A cup of water is also placed because when the souls of the departed come to visit on this day, they are often very thirsty from their trip. We also place some items that are familiar to children from their time in school, like crayons and a backpack. Familiar items are placed on the altars to help the departed come back to a familiar setting. Sadly, there have been many lives lost to school shootings, and being so, we were unable to find an image for every one of those victims and be able to place them on this ofrenda. And although we do honor them, we decided to include the faces of the victims of one of the most recent and deadliest school shootings, the shooting in Uvalde, Texas, where we lost 19 children and 2 teachers. The children were just ages between 9 and 10 years old. This has been the second deadliest elementary school shooting in US history, with Sandy Hook Elementary in 2012 being the first. Having their pictures on the ofrendas help the departed know where to go when they come back into the real world. And tradition has it that if their picture is not placed up on the altar, the ofrenda, then they cannot cross over to the land of the living and be next to their loved ones who are still here living. We decided to include the monarch butterflies as they are very significant in the celebration of Día de los Muertos. Monarch butterflies are believed to hold the spirit of the departed. The monarch butterflies return to Mexico in the fall, coincides with Día de los Muertos, and it is seen as ancestors returning to celebrate with their families.
Here at the base of our altar, we have an imputation of law enforcement's historic failures in preventing these school shootings. We have to ask ourselves as a society, why police budgets increase while schools remain underfunded? And we see that school shootings are the result of policy failures that we must correct, because in the spirit of Día de los Muertos, yes, we must remember those who are lost to violence, but to truly honor those memories, we must dismantle this nation's culture of violence and injustice, and in its place, celebrate the culture of love that we share here tonight. And to conclude this exploration of this important topic and honoring these lost souls, I'd like to introduce Deja, who will be reading her original poem, The Ascent of the Young Marigolds.
Deja, I think you're muted.
You're muted there, Deja.
Y'all can hear me now?
Yes.
So sorry about that. Hello, good evening, guys. My name is Deja. I'll be reading a poem that I wrote called The Ascent of Young Marigolds, dedicated to those who lost their loved ones from the school shootings. Let's shine the light on the lightened youth, where their marigold beams forever gleam like the sun, and their innocent petals blossoms like the quarters of the moon. May their inner vibrant spirit, full of light, of knowledge, and love, always flourish, as their cosmic existence pollinate the air of their echoing laughter of joy. May the remembrance of their stem to their soil be watered, refreshed, and nourished. May the whole world that looms of the dark that tends to be noisome, like the stars in the night, may their glory light forever be radiated. May they always be remembered, not wilted or faded.
That concludes our presentation of the altar.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Wow. I am speechless, y'all. Well, this brings us to our Q&A. And this is a time, I mean, this is powerful. I'm like, I feel like I didn't sign up for this. So this is our time for a Q&A. Please bring your questions to our panel and also to our students. Can we please give them a round of applause? So again, feel free to unmute yourself and or just post your question on the chat and we'll address them. Again, we have a little bit of time. We have 5 more minutes than what we had in the program.
I have a question.
Yes.
So good evening, and thank you for hosting such a beautiful event. Thank you to the students for sharing such amazing work, and to all the panelists. And I guess this is more of a question that could be for either Dr. Sandoval or any of the panelists. But there was mention this evening about Western civilization and how they cope with grief much differently than many of our ancestral traditions and ways of coping. And I'm wondering if there is mention, whether it's in research or if we witness in today's society, how maybe the Latinx culture is changing their way of coping. I've witnessed, many families in the Latino culture, in the Latinx Chicano families, and how grief is often very limited and how you grieve, and the time that you can grieve. So I've seen it where it's, it's like, you gotta stop crying now, like the funeral's over, you gotta cope with it, and if Dia de los Muertos is here, it's usually like, stop crying or else you're not letting the souls rest. And I think there's a lot of cultural barriers there that continue to exist. And so I guess my question is, how have we found any, new information on how families are either seeking new ways to heal outside of Dia de los Muertos and outside of a funeral? Is there any conversations that give us, more information on how the coping is changing within our culture, I guess? Sorry, it's a loaded question.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually hoping that some of my fellow panelists might be able to take this one on. Although I will say this is related to your question, but it may be addressing a different component, because you did give us a lot to think about there. Specifically with like Chicano Latino grief processes, I will say it's been important for me to always pay attention to what I would call, as a scholar, the political economy of grief, which is to say that when we grieve, we don't get time off from work in the same way that other people might be able to have that privilege of taking time off from work because they are economically able to take time off from work to grieve. There is also, I mean, you really kind of hit it, the notion of like machismo running through this idea of the grieving process, that it has to be quick, that it has to be done like this, because it's not, well, in terms of like the male identity, it's not quote unquote manly to grieve, and therefore you have to move and rush through that grieving process because it's not part of the masculine portrayal. I think that still is definitely a part of it. I mean, sadly, it's something that I've dealt with in my own family. Like, I have firsthand knowledge of these things. I could speak on it from that, but I don't know any other researchers that are on the hunt for those kind of answers, though. So I wouldn't be able to really help you there, but I really appreciate that question. But maybe some of the other panelists might be able to speak to it a little bit better.
Like Dr. Sandoval said, I don't really have any like research basis on this, but it's more so stemming from my personal life. But the grieving process, I find that like Dr. Sandoval was alluding to, oftentimes is very rooted in a lot of cultural machismo, where men aren't supposed to cry, and grief is supposed to be kind of rushed through, even though that we know in regards to mental health and psychology that you can't really rush through grief and you can't rush the grieving process. If I'm allowed to share something more personally, when one of my cousins died, actually the cousin who gave me my name, it really affected my father, who is that traditional, machista, never ask for help, never say this or that, just bottle it all up inside. I saw the way that it really affected him. And I think that one of the biggest things that really helped him process and move through his grief was the fact that my older sister, who's actually a graduate of Stan State with a master's in social work, and she's currently a therapist, having that privilege of having access to that education. And as a first gen woman, my sister, being able to then use that information to help heal our family outside of the machista structure. When my father realized that the grief that he was holding on to was affecting his family, and having that outlet of my sister having the knowledge of how to heal our family, I find is really a way that, at least for me personally, growing up, losing so many people, we never grieved out loud, but it was for the first time that I had witnessed, because of this added component of education, of higher education, more specifically for first gen students, that then grief was allowed to be more natural, that we started deconstructing a lot of these machista standards and values that were in our family. And I think that just harkens back to the same thing of education being liberation and reform, and education being powerful in the sense of being able to restructure a lot of the oppressive societal standards that we experience, not just in Mexican culture, but overall.
I wanted to offer something briefly. I think, and I appreciate the question, because I agree, and I agree with my fellow panelists as well. The one thing that comes up for me is just thinking about back home where we're from, in the Tucson area, in the Sonoran Desert. We're on Autumn territory, we're on Yoema territory, and it's they say in the Yaqui traditions, they say that the doors open on September 30th. And so for the entire month of October, it's the animas are present. And it's the same with the autumns. You'll see the migrations, the caminatas, the pilgrimage begin to happen. And so for me, what that makes me think of is how much time was dedicated to this, right? And how much time continues to, from at our home and all the Yaqui communities in Arizona, you see the mesas going up in the front of the houses, and that's all month, and in Mexico, it could be weeks as well. And so I just think about like the time, and then also because so many things are rushed, and I feel like in American culture we're like constantly trying to like put it into like one day and make it a holy day, a holiday. And but for us it was more about like paying attention to the earth and the sun and the dance that they're having and the season, right? We're in the season of it and how to be with it, and this is the times to acknowledge it. And during those times we have very specific practices, or even very specific instruments and tools where we can invoke our ancestors and be with them. And then those tools could also be utilized throughout the entire year. So it's not just during that season, but those are the tools and those instruments that help us continue to mourn and grieve and be with them. And I think that's something that Maria was speaking to earlier, right? In terms of some of the instruments that we use and the tools that we use in our ceremonies, that very intentional about that. So there's a constant relationship, right, to it, right? And then this help. I really appreciate what Dr. Matthew and some are speaking in regards to machismo and just the unfortunate reality of like not being able to cry, right? And that's like, you know, perpetuates and, you know, into all in our families and all genders, right? But it's like really upheld within those that are male identified, and it's really unfortunate because there's like a missed opportunity to heal and be vulnerable and grow in that too. So I just wanted to offer that. I said I was going to be brief, and I wasn't. I apologize.
I'll just say something quick, you know, and I can't speak for Latino culture and, you know, like, but coming from an indigenous perspective, I think it's always really hard to be trying to, you know, just decolonize our paradigm when it comes to ceremony, ritual, religion, you know, shifting the words that we use that really shift that, you know, changing the words that we use that really shift our paradigm. And, you know, even in thinking about using the word creator, oftentimes that, like when we use that kind of language, we kind of evoke, you know, a hierarchy and inferiority, and just really changing the way we view ourselves, you know, as inferior and kind of like in debt, you know, always having to, you know, be better, you know, or to not sin, or, you know, all those ways that we were taught, you know, and even in the Yaqui community, in my tribe, it's really hard because there's so much Catholicism infused into everything that we do. So it's a bit, for me personally, it's been a really big struggle to try to kind of deconstruct, you know, the things that I know that my tata and my family have said, and at the same time existing like in a Christian, you know, infused culture is really hard, you know, and I think something that's important is like looking at the seasons, how Chucho mentioned, you know, these are longer nights, you know, this is the time of, you know, when it's colder, where things are underground, you know, we plant seeds under the ground and we grow root plants, right? Like there's more growth under the ground because it's the time of darkness and the earth slows down in her, you know, in that activity, you know, you see the animals hide. And then when we move back towards the spring, that's when we plant things that grow sobre la tierra, above ground, looking for the sun, and more animals and things come out. And I think that, you know, in the traditions that we practice, you know, there's a fire, and in that ceremony, you see the wood turn to ashes or to coals, or you see the candles burn down, or, you know, I think that Western European culture has really tried to make us think in permanence. And, you know, that's why we have ideas of like heaven, or that's why we build these really big structures that we want them to last forever. Or, you know, we want our fame to be, you know, we want to live on forever. But, you know, I think that looking at nature is a really big reminder that we're in process, you know, and decolonizing our paradigm to look at the way nature is always in process and things are cyclical, and understanding and living that and shifting paradigm. Because how beautiful was it when we looked at those altars? We all felt that in our hearts, and that's the value and importance of a collective experience that we don't have nowadays when people pass on. It's atrocious, the process when people pass away now, but we together got to experience this collective burden, you know, of loss and injustice and all of these things. And at the same time that we carry that and move forward, we also understand that things are going to continue to transform, and they can flourish into something beautiful because of the way that we choose to carry things through that process.
Are there any other questions from anyone?
I guess I could offer a question, considering that I'm a mixed Filipino and Mexican person of color. I was wondering if you want to start this tradition with like, not, I have grown up with my
Filipino side, but I do want to be more in touch with my Mexican side. And as much as I can't see that side, I was wondering, besides asking them, how could you start this tradition by yourself, like this started?
Thank you, Stacy, for your question.
Stacy, I'm gonna offer just a couple things very quickly. I really, just from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate this question, first of all, because not everybody asks that before trying to make it a tradition. Many people are just like, yo, I'm just gonna start this thing because it looks cool. You know what I mean? So the fact that that you're tuned in like that is really amazing. I would say in the Philippines, for the last 100 years, a version of Día de Muertos has existed. Part of that has to do with the history of colonization of the Philippines, of course. It's a very complicated thing. But on November 1st and 2nd, in areas of the Philippines, they actually do visit the cemeteries. They do make altars. They do call them ofrendas. So that already exists. The other thing that I would say is that there has historically been a beautiful mix of Mexican and Filipino culture, both within Mexico, because you had Filipino immigrants coming to Mexico, as well as Mexican immigrants traveling to the Philippines to live and work, especially vaqueros, working ranches in the Philippines, believe it or not. I would encourage you to look, first of all, at a fantastic book by my colleague, Rudy Guevara, which is about what it means to exist as Mexican Filipino, which he calls a Mexipino. It is a book, I believe it's University of Arizona Press may be the book, but Rudy Guevara Jr. Is a book to check out. And I would say, given that there is already that cultural basis for you, that in some sense you may, turning to this as a cultural element that you can use for yourself, whether it's to make an altar or something like that, I feel like that's already there for you as somebody who's Mexican and Filipino. So those are just a couple of resources I would throw your way immediately.
I have one question. Do you guys feel that Chicanos here in, Chicanos are carrying out the tradition of the Día de los Muertos, or you guys feel that this is kind of, in the US, is kind of going away?
Definitely, I feel that in certain pockets, especially where there's more of that Latino culture, you see more and more Dia de Muertos being celebrated. For example, in Los Angeles, San Francisco, really these hubs where you find a lot of that Mexican culture. Dia de Muertos, maybe not in the same way that it's celebrated in Mexico, but it's still definitely recognized here in the United States. And a lot of people do make effort to recognize it. But as I'm sure Dr. Sandoval or even Maria or Chucho would be able to expand upon, it takes on different forms in the different places that you go. I myself was born in SoCal, studied in Northern California, and then now ended up in the Central Valley. So moving across California and seeing the different ways that Dia de Muertos is celebrated really, I guess, elucidates the different ways that where you are definitely influences the specific traditions and ways that you celebrate and honor your ancestors and loved ones.
Other questions? We have room for about one more. So I'm going to ask this one, and this goes for my students. What did you learn from all this? Given that, you know, that you had to do an altar, what was the learning process like? Is there any big takeaway, if anybody wants to share?
I can share.
Take it
I
away.
feel like when we were putting together our altar, myself, I found out a lot of things that I didn't know mean in an altar, like the water, like the bread, the flowers. So like learning all about that is very special. And in the future, I hope I can create an actual like real life one and begin that tradition.
I also want to add, I was mentioning this to also to the professor, Professor who went out last week. I'm Mexican, and my family also we have always grown up, learning about knowing about Dia de los Muertos, and but I don't know how to say this, but I was telling him, it's, for me, when I was younger, I always felt kind of like sad to celebrate it, because it made me think of like, oh, my grandma, she's not here anymore, or oh, like, until I got older, then I started to see it as what it really is, a celebration. And I think just for me as a mom, also, I want to pass that on to my children, and helping them to see it as that, a celebration, us remembering our loved ones, us reuniting with them, and not as a sad event, or like, because I feel like at times that kind of held me back from like, even like, like I would be sad to think about them. And so like, oh, like I'll put up their picture. Yeah. But, it makes me sad to do this. I'm doing this, like, with sad in my heart. But now, like, learning more about like how Arlene said, like the definitions of the things that are on the altar and how special they are. It's amazing to see it now as a celebration, but I didn't really grow up seeing it that way. For me, at least, I just saw it as like a sad thing, but it's really, really nice to see it as the way it is, a celebration.
Thank you.
I also wanted to answer this question. I just really enjoyed thoroughly this entire event. And the things that were offered here tonight was really touching to my heart. I really do appreciate Dr. Sandoval as well, because, being African American and like, caught in this duality of, our culture as it stands today, we are pretty out of touch with our grassroots and the different cultural things that we actually were celebrating as Indigenous people before all of this, and it felt really good to my soul, to my spirit, to hear that a lot of this, Dia de los Muertos is part of my culture as well, and like, just tapping into that and celebrating it here today, like, made me feel recharged in taking back my power, and being able to use this as a tool for my culture, and, not to have any fear of like appropriation or anything like that, because we share the same blood. So it was just, it was very powerful to hear that, and to have, the knowledge to back it up, like, hey, no, this really is a thing. So I appreciated that so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So we're going to cut the Q&A and open up a moment of silence. And at this time, feel free, if you want to put in the chat like a name or something you learned. And remember that when you're in ceremony, what's important is that you open your heart, that you open your mind. And when your intentions are good, then you can't go wrong, but you have to do that work. You have to open yourself. You have to let your light shine. And so as long as you do that and you come in a good way, good things will come. And so I just want to leave it. So again, let's take a moment of silence. If you want to honor somebody in the chat, or if you just one moment, please. Thank you for those who wrote something. And again, thank you again. I just want to say thank you to everybody. Okay, so now if we can finish with a closing prayer or song. Chucho, if you can please guide us in this moment.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, and also come out to each and every one of you. And I just appreciate, just the chat is being blown up with all those relatives. That's so beautiful to see that. And, yeah, this what Dr. Sandoval was saying about collapsing geographical spaces, man. I didn't realize how powerful this could be. I think we underestimate these virtual spaces. I know I do personally a lot of times, and I worry sometimes about a disconnect, and but I'm feeling a lot in my heart right now. So I just appreciate what everybody brings, and all the stories of all these relatives, just seeing their names and about all their experiences and everything that they offered, y'all's journey too, and how all of them have impacted your journey somehow, some way, and just the way that you're honoring them this way tonight. So I wanted to share a song. The song it's a Nahuatl poem, and it's something about what Maria was talking about earlier, being able to acknowledge and recognize the flowers and the songs that we're offering over here on Earth, and that we don't wait, that we acknowledge each other for those flowers and those songs that we carry, those stories, those vibrations, and so yeah, so wanted to share that, and again, just really, really, truly appreciate, feeling really grateful to be able to see all those ofrendas in that way. It's my first time seeing digital ofrendas, and really, really powerful, really beautiful. And just all the words that were shared, and the poems, everything that was shared here tonight, throughout the night. So I'm hoping for a lot of healing, a lot of good medicine for each and every one of you. Kene ke chwano yolotzen atsemoto pale tewolon nemele senguabones lalepon tines kayo toteo shochime tines kayo todo cuicone ekatlene yaske amitlani teño telio la quit la pan la lipan kene que chuano yolotzen Anzemoto pali tiwolon Nemeles en guabones lalepon Tines kayo toteo shochime Tines Eskayo toteo kuikome. One teo chiwa, one teo chiwa, one teo chiwa, one teo chiwa. Teo. Asokamati. Thank you, Rowena.
Thank you, Chucho. So again, I want to say a few things before we end, right? And we're right on time, and this is what you call bringing ceremony to university spaces. This is what we in ethnic studies here at CSU Stan, we call decolonizing the university, decolonizing these spaces, right? And we have yet to cease fighting for them, right? As we've learned. And so I just want to say again, on behalf of the Ethnic Studies Department at CSU, we would like to thank you for making it to our event. And just remember that we are spiritual beings having this human experience, right? I'm gonna say that again. We're spiritual beings having this human experience, and that we, like as it was mentioned, we carry medicine, and that if you ever feel alone, your ancestors are with you. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone. Buenas noches.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was truly an honor to be part of this. Thank you to all the speakers and everyone that came tonight, and for those wonderful prayers and songs. And yes, definitely, I feel much more connected to my ancestors after this, definitely. So thank you all. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Muchas gracias. Buenas noches. Muy bonito todo.
Thank you. Nestor.
Gracias. Buenas noches.